welcome to our weekly video series that we've been doing. My name is JJ Johannes with IAHomes. I'm one of the co-founders of the company. We started in 2003. I've been a licensed real estate agent since 2012 and a licensed real estate broker since 2014. And today we're going to be talking about negotiation tips for both the buyers and sellers in real estate. And going over those with me is Matt Clark with the Clark Real Estate Team. So Matt, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. As JJ said, my name is Matt Clark. I'm with the Clark Real Estate Team right here at IAHomes Realty. And I've been licensed since 2016, actually November 16. Was a real estate agent all through 17. I was a part-time agent for the first 6 months, full-time agent starting in April. And 2018 was actually my first, I guess, full-on year as a real estate agent here with IAHomes Realty.
Yeah, and so, going into, the negotiation tips, let's just kind of jump right into it and kind of cover a bunch of different topics. So when people are looking to buy a house, let's start from the buyer's perspective. So you've gone out, you've shown them a bunch of places, and they see a property that they like. And so now you're representing them as their real estate agent, and they want to know, they'll say, hey, Matt, what should we offer on this place? What do you think is a fair offer? Or
Sure.
What can we get it for? Or what should we do? Where do you start to look to help them understand the value and maybe how they can position themselves on that?
Sure. So I would say the first thing we start off is just, I am really good in digging into comps. So, in that neighborhood, in that price point, the bedrooms, the bathrooms, the finishes. I know some people like to talk about price per square foot, but in my opinion, not all square feet are necessarily created equal. So really diving into pictures on those other listings. I even pull down property disclosures from sold properties to compare. Was that one that sold for the same price that you want to offer? Did it have an older AC, an older furnace? Did it have things where the roof was older? So I think all those things can kind of factor in projecting out maybe upfront costs to update the home or to change those things such as older utilities, and kind of making your offer based on that.
And then, so that's kind of looking at the comparables. What about some of the history of the home? Like looking at, when it was bought, have they tried to list it? Has it been on the market a while? Was it, by owner on Zillow? Do you look through some of that information as well?
Yeah, I would say the two biggest resources there would be our local MLS. We can see, was it listed with a previous agent? When things come up and they say they're a new listing, they're not always a new listing necessarily. They may have been listed a couple months prior, but maybe they switched agents, switched brokerages or whatever. So that's always good to see if it was listed before. You can see, had they price dropped? Were they at a certain amount, but now that they're a new listing again, are they higher than that mark? You kind of get a seller's idea of their potential threshold. Zillow is also another resource because you can see, did they list it by owner at one point? So there's a lot of things there that also help determine what would be an appropriate offer when you look at that history.
Yeah, along those same lines, when you look at Zillow, it'll have the by owner stuff, but there'll also be if they tried to rent it as well. So you can see, did they try to rent it for a while and then they're trying to sell it? And so there's some history there. And one of the things that we want to think about for our clients is, there was a house I was actually just looking at today for a client I'm working with that it's been on and off the markets. They bought it over 10 years ago, 14 years ago. It's been on and off the market 3 different times that they tried to sell it. And so right away, there's a little bit of a flag there that I'm concerned, even if we get what seems like a good price, is it something that's hard to sell? So if this is a forever home, that's one thing. But if it's a home they're only going to be in 5-7 years, are they going to have those same problems trying to sell it? Because you can see sometimes where a house may have a challenge to sell, but sometimes it's just straight up price, that they priced it wrong. There could be a lot of different factors, but you see that flag, so to speak. I always look at, if it's a flag, yellow flag, doesn't mean stop. It just means we might want to get a little bit more information to try to understand why that was going on.
Yeah, the last thing you want as the new owner of that property is to have the exact same problems that seller had when they were attempting to sell the home. So yeah, checking with the days on market that was listed before that, that's going to be a huge factor too, and what you might be able to get a feel for that seller's motivation to sell that home, and more sell it at a good price for you.
Yeah, when there's those issues, for buyers, one of the things I like to look at and talk about is, is the issue of why it didn't sell something you can fix? If it didn't sell because it's a tough sell because it backs up to railroad tracks, it's a tracks or it's on a busy road, you can't change that. If it's because the way that the decor was or carpet or something like that, that's something cosmetic, well, then you can change that. So the issues, where do they fall? Are they cosmetic or are they things that you cannot change? So that's one thing definitely for people to look at before they put an offer in, because are they buying those same issues?
Yeah, I always call those red flag issues or
Mhm.
red flag characteristics. Is there something that you cannot change that won't change when you turn to sell a home, whether you're on a busy street
Mhm.
or they don't like that maybe the main floor only has 2 bedrooms and you prefer to have 3? That's something most likely can't be changed. What's the school district, things like that you don't have any control over. So those are things that definitely play a factor, and you have to be prepared to, when you turn to the seller side, that you're going to be able to overcome those obstacles, or at least you're aware of them.
Yeah. And, along, talking about the negotiations, there's something that's changed in the last 10 years is social media, and how people will post a lot of details about what kind of is going on in their day-to-day lives. Is that something you ever use to look at social media to see if a buyer or a seller, there's any activity going on there?
Yeah, I always tell clients I'm working with on the buy side to maybe filter that a little bit. Maybe don't put it all out there. On the selling side of things, I actually have seen buyers who have written offers on my listings. I see their names and I can see maybe what they're doing online, and they'll say, hey, just saw our dream home tonight, writing an offer or something like that. So you do have to be careful. I've seen that a few times out on social media. So,
yeah.
I do pass that information on to my seller. This person incredibly, really likes the home. And you kind of leverage what you kind of know from social media to maybe be stiffer on your asking price to benefit the seller. So something to definitely be aware of.
Yeah, just think about that. If you're buying or selling, your social media profiles, whatever channels that you're on, anything that you put out there that is public, you can make your social media private or your post private. But if you have anything out there public, whether you're working with somebody from IAHomes or any agency, the other agent may be looking at to see, did you post something like, we just saw our dream home, hope they take our offer, something like that could hinder or change the dynamics of the negotiations. So then on, so we talked a little bit that on the selling side. Is there any other places that you kind of really research on the selling side, as far as when you get an offer from a buyer? Is there much more really there?
It's a lot of the same. We kind of nip those issues in the beginning when we're pricing the home.
Yeah.
So we do touch on some of those things already, but I think, to kind of repeat it, the social media part I think is very important, and it's something as a seller, even being careful what people say inside of homes and things like that. It can be you're walking on pins and needles sometimes with that stuff.
And that's a good point. That again, now we get into smart homes and people having different devices in their home. Just kind of being conscious about what you're saying in the home as well is something that you may want to think about. A quick topic that I want to talk to on the seller side just kind of gets into the negotiations, because it's definitely something I've seen a lot more of in the last 5 years. It's pretty common, particularly a first-time home buyer, that the buyer is going to ask for closing cost credits of some sort. I would say well over half the first-time home buyer offers, I'd say closer to 75 or 80% of those offers are going to have, we ask the seller to pay $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, whatever the closing costs are. And depending on how the seller feels about that, one of the things I'll see sometimes is they'll say, the seller, this is when they see that offer, they'll be like, well, I don't want to pay their closing costs. Nobody paid my closing costs, when I bought it. So when you see that, what's some of the conversation with the seller and working through that to negotiate with the buyer?
Yeah, and you do see that a lot. I would say, like you said, 80%, I'd almost say sometimes 90% of offers, regardless if they're first-time home buyer or not, are going to be asking for some kind of credit towards their closing costs. So something to work for with the seller, it's all about your bottom line. So whether you sell that home for $200 and give up a $2,000 credit towards the buyer's closing costs, or you sell that home for $198, it's not going to make a huge difference in terms of the seller's bottom line. So it's, again, sometimes we work through those things. If we see that offer come in and, that buyer's putting down 25%, but they still want like $4,000 credit, like, well, maybe we can ease up on that credit. They're a good buyer. They're putting a lot of money down. Vice versa, if a buyer might be financing this home at 100%, maybe that money up front for their closing costs is more important. Maybe they don't have as much liquid cash available. So those are things you have to, just kind of take offer, one at a time. But I do get that a lot where they don't want to pay somebody else's closing costs. But at the end of the day, if we make up for that with, staying a little more stiff on the purchase price, it's all about that bottom number. And we work through those as we get offers.
Yeah. And one of the things that I've done a few times, sometimes with those sellers, sometimes buyers, but it's almost always a seller, is I'll say, let's make an or offer. And we essentially counter offer two different options, so to speak, for the buyer. And one is, using kind of that same scenario. If it's a $200,000 offer and that's what the seller wants to counter back at, look, I want to do 200 and no closing costs, and I'm not going to pay their closing costs. That's fine. They want 3,000. So what if we do 200,000, no closing costs, or 203 with $3,000 in closing costs, because that subtracts out, and we're still back at that 200,000. And most of the times, if a seller is not wanting to counter that, that's one of the things that we'll usually say, okay, well, if that's the case, let's counter that way. And then in that scenario, what I always feel is that we then find what's more important. Is the price? Do they want a lower price?
Yep.
Or do they really want that closing cost? They want that capital, 3,000 not to come out of what they have on their side. They want to save that.
Yeah, because sometimes that closing cost is a need. I mean, I've seen from even on my own clients that maybe the lender's requiring a certain amount of closing costs be covered by the seller. So those are conversations you have with the other agent. And like I said, as long as you work that out where it nets the same and you're happy with that, then there really isn't a huge difference, or it should be a big deal. Yeah.
So let's switching gears, a couple more kind of hot topics or scenarios, so to speak, that we see that we'll talk about. So one is low ball offer is kind of a term used lots of times. So let's talk about those from the buyers and sellers perspective. So low ball offer, you have a client, they're looking to make an offer and they want to make that low ball offer on a house. What's some of the things that you're looking at, discussing with them, thinking about?
Sure. So there are some instances where the low ball offer might be an appropriate offer. If a home is set for, 6, 7, 8 months, if we have comps to support what you're looking to offer, low ball is really, it's a relative term. So what might be a low ball offer to that seller might actually be kind of an appropriate offer based on what we talked about earlier with comps and other market data. So from a seller's perspective, you just kind of got to take those in stride. They will come. But from a buyer's perspective, again, there's a lot of factors at play, but if the home's been out there a while, not a lot of movement, there's a lot of inventory, a lot of that type of home around. And again, comparing pictures to other comparables, sometimes a low ball offer might be appropriate. But it's all in perception.
It is. It's a relative term, like you said, and there's no hard, fast rule on what is a low ball offer and what isn't. I generally just feel like, okay, if you're offering, and days on the market could play into this, but when you get into that 10% range, to me, you're looking at potentially a low ball offer. And you're exactly right on the offer. Low ball is relative to the term of the price that the seller set, which may not really be accurate in the market. They might lower down to the range where you're offering, or even lower, so the low ball offer is being set by what the seller asked. When, if you look at the comparables, which is what you want to look at, is when you're representing the buyers, what's it worth in this market, and then negotiate from there. And then the other thing, on a low ball offer that is good for a buyer to know, in my opinion, is I'll communicate with the buyer that if they want to make an offer and I feel like, okay, this is an offer the seller could look at as a low ball offer. I'm going to talk to the buyer about, do you want this home or will you take it? Because if you want this home and this is the one, and we make a low ball offer, what I feel like is low ball offer at looking at the comps, even, we could I guess the best way to say it, we could piss off the seller.
Oh yeah.
And they could just say, I'm done. I'm not selling my house to that person. I don't have to sell it to them. I'm not going to, even if we come back as a good or full price offer, they could just say no. And so you kind of want to tread lightly there, as if you really want it, and you could then piss off the seller and they're not going to sell you the house.
Yeah, I mean, this is supposed to be a business transaction, but to just say, and we know that emotion is not supposed to play into it, but to think that it doesn't factor in is just not accurate. It factors in all the time. So
it factors in heavily.
Yeah, and to that point, that kind of 10%, I wrote one last week that might be considered a low ball offer. It was $15,000 under list price. And I presented it in a way to say, this is my buyer's only offer they're going to make. It's their best and final. We looked at some comps. This is what we feel is fair. The home had been sitting since November. If you'd like to strike up a deal, this is what we're willing to do. And that seller did take that offer. So again, it was relative. So to us, we felt like they were a little high. It might have came off as a low ball to them, but at the end of the day, it's the only thing they had on the table at that point. So it ended up working out, and I think everybody's going to be happy for it.
Yeah. So now let's flip to the other side. Now you're a seller because you list houses as well, and you have a listing, and it's been on the market whatever amount of time, but you get that offer, and immediately there's probably a little bit of a cringe, like, okay,
present all offers.
Got to present all offers. I'm going to talk to my seller, and I know this could light a fuse for them, or they could be upset about this. Now the emotions are going to start coming into play here. So what's some of the conversation you have with the seller then on the other side of it when you get that local offer?
Basically, just to see, sometimes I can have a candid conversation with the agent on the other end, just seeing where they're coming from. It helps if I can at least show my client where that person is coming from. Maybe there's a better chance that at the very least we can come to a common ground at some point during the negotiation. So having a conversation with that other agent, again, working through that net proceeds, we want you to walk away with something you're happy with. So if we can negotiate that low ball offer to maybe get something to where you're a little more happy with, but just doing that market data and that research, I think, and as I said, a lot of those things I think you kind of nip in the beginning if you're pricing the home correctly too. But sometimes having a nice conversation with the other side and just getting a feel for where they're coming from, it at least helps to find that common ground a lot easier.
Yeah, and it can help, especially if you talk to the other agent and it's, look, that's all they're willing to offer. There's no real support to it. It's just their feeling. Or if they're like, here's the 3 comps that we're looking at, or the other homes, here's the other 3 houses we went to, and so that, like you said, can definitely help in the conversation. And, one of the things, it's definitely not a tried and true, but one of the conversations I've had with sellers sometimes is, not all, but sometimes when there's an offer, so go back, let's use $200,000 as the asking price for the house. 10% below that is $180,000. So if we get an offer for $180,000, I'll talk to the seller about, look, sometimes if the price is $200 and they're offering $180, the buyer is hoping to land in the middle. Like they're looking at where they want to land, and then they're going that much farther down. So they're just, if you look at the middle of like 190 in that scenario, they're probably hoping to buy it around that price range. Is it something that we're going to be able to get there? Are you going to be happy with that if we look at the net proceeds? And then we try to work, to see what we can do to get that accomplished. But that's one of the things I've seen sometimes is, and I've seen it also, part of where you get that from is being on the buyer side, and they'll say, look, I'm willing to pay 190 for it. It's at 200. Let's offer 180. Yeah. You start to see where, their offer point and the asking price where they would like to buy it at or less is the halfway point in between there.
Yeah, and that works both ways. So if your ideal landing spot on that $200,000 house is 190, so you want to offer 180, hoping to get to that 190. Sometimes sellers will do the same thing. If you're really hoping to get 190, well, I want to list at 200 because I know somebody's going to want to negotiate. So it does work both ways. So, and that's why it's important to have. I'm very data driven, so that's why it's important to have the data, have those comps, because you have to be able to support what that price is. But yeah, that happens all the time, even on both sides, where that lower offer comes in because they want to meet somewhere, in between where your list price is, and sellers do the exact same thing.
Yeah, and throughout all the negotiations and the whole process, there's a lot of emotions involved. And I will say, one of the things that strikes up one of the most emotions is when there's a low offer on the seller side. When they get that offer, they may feel offended, and so working through that and trying to, as much as possible, try to take the emotions out of it to kind of negotiate, and try to get that home sold, because that's obviously the goal of why we're there.
And I think that's where your role or my role kind of comes in, because I can kind of look at it from more of an outside perspective, even though I'm within the constraints of the deal. I can take those emotions out, where sometimes it's hard. If you've lived in that home 30 years, it's your family home. You've put so much money into that home. Sometimes it's good, and that's some of the value that I think we bring to the table, is taking some of that out of it and leaving the emotions at the door.
Correct. Yep. So now let's go talk about another scenario. So another scenario that you can get when you list a house is multiple offers.
Everybody's favorite scenario.
When you're a seller, almost everybody, I'd say it's pretty much universal, they love to have the multiple offers. And so let's talk first about the buyer side. So you're working with a client, they find the house that they like, it's their favorite one, or it's the one for them. They make an offer, and then inevitably an hour or two later, you get the call, you get the text from the agent, the listing agent, that says, hey, by the way, we have another offer. There's multiple offers. And there's different ways. And we'll talk on the selling side about how you can handle this. But the most common way is we have multiple offers. We're asking for everybody's highest and best by X time, 6 o'clock tonight, noon tomorrow, whatever it is. They want everybody who's made an offer to give their highest and best. So you have the buyer in that scenario. What's kind of the conversation like, or how are you talking to them about how to proceed?
Yeah, a lot of times if there was hopes of getting what you felt like was a deal, or having some more negotiating room, sometimes that pretty much goes out the door at that point. So, if you love the home, talk about, if you feel like you paid on that $200,000 house, if you feel like you paid 202, do you plan on being in the home long term? Are you going to be in that home for 20, 30 years? Are you going to turn around and sell this thing in 5 years? Is it the one? If you really feel strongly it's the one, that $2,000 might only be an extra $14 a month on your payment. Yep. So those are things that you have to kind of figure out and pretty much ask yourself, is it worth it for this home, for your particular circumstance? So like I said, if it's a long-term home, it's the home you love and you don't want to let it go, then maybe you can be more, a little less lenient on what you were hoping to get the home for. But at the end of the day, you got to be happy with your purchase. So
yeah, and that's so key. There's always so much. There's no one way to do it every time. There's so much context that goes into all of these scenarios. And so if someone is looking for that home and it's one they're really in love with and they think they're going to live there long term, going up a little bit on price isn't going to be a huge detriment. But if it's something they're not sure about as much, or they're going to live there, they think they might be only live there for 3 years, and going up higher on price and maybe even higher than what you as an agent think it's worth in the market, then it's going to be harder when they go to sell in a few years, to come out on a positive equity side. Sure. And so, one of the things in that scenario, when I have a buyer and we get multiple offers, one of the things I'm talking to them about is, one thing you always wonder, is there really another offer? That's reality of it. Yeah,
everybody always has that suspicion.
Yeah, is there really another offer? Am I bidding against myself, so to speak? And that's something that we, it's hard to necessarily always know. But one of the things that I'll talk to my clients about on the buying side is, I would just want you to think about this house and buying it. And again, we'll use the 200,000. So if your highest and best is 200 and you find out it's sold for 202, what's your feeling going to be? Is it going to be like, dang it, I should have offered 202, or I should have offered 2025. We were thinking about 203. Thinking at what point am I going to be okay that I didn't get it? Because if you see that it's sold, because we can see that in the assessor data for 202, 6 months later, and you're like, oh man, I wish we would have just gone higher. Those are the things you want your clients just to kind of think through, so they're positioned for that. And the other thing I always find I seem to feel is true is that whatever's meant to happen will happen. Losing houses in multiple offer situations from the buyer side, had that multiple times. Last year was a year where it happened quite often,
especially in the early part of the year.
Yeah, in the spring last year. And so eventually those buyers are always happier with the house that they found. So what was meant to be will be, and you'll find that place. And it's an emotional point to lose out on that house. but just kind of if that's what happens, but you just keep looking forward and moving forward, and then inevitably another one seems to come up.
Well, and I've had people too where it's kind of that same scenario where you see what it sold for before, and then we'll see that data, and they see that and they're like, well, yeah, we could have done that. So when I always tell people, you got to put your best foot forward. When they want that best and final, it has to be your best and final.
Yep.
Don't come up short on your own best and final. Find out it sold for a little bit more than what you thought your best and final was. Make that your best and final offer, and like you said, what'll be, and don't have any regrets over it.
Yeah, and also on that, one more thing, and that's the buyer side before we go to the seller side. One of the things that I've seen sometimes, and this is good for buyers to know, is, and this was one I was on a listing agent side, we had two basically exact same offers: closing date, purchase price, closing cost, inspections, like everything was the same. The only real difference to them is they went with the offer that offered first. So that doesn't mean necessarily you should offer first, but also know that if there's any little extra things that you want to throw in there, when you're in multiple offer situation, if you throw in a home warranty, or if you want to have them leave something that isn't included, a washer or a dryer, that could be the difference maker. I mean,
making
there could
those
be the
offers,
smallest thing.
Yep.
It doesn't seem like a big thing, but that could be, because those offers could come in very close. And I've had ones on the listing agent side where they're the exact same: purchase price, closing costs, closing date, like everything is the same.
Yeah, they make a difference. So making that offer as clean as possible. I had a client this year, we missed out on a home literally over a home warranty, a $400 home warranty.
Yep.
Closing was the same, purchase price the same. I think we even asked for the same closing cost credit. But we asked for a warranty and the other one did not. And that $450, I think we offered first, but because our offer was worse in the seller's perspective by $450,
yeah,
they went with the other one. That's what they lost it over. So.
And buyers will think, well, why did they just come back and tell me that? And to the seller, they're feeling like your offer is your best and final. So like you said before, making sure that offer really is your best and final.
Yep.
So now let's change the role, and now you're the listing agent. And you get the sellers, most of them, their dream scenario, they get multiple offers. So what's kind of the conversation there? There's different options that you can do. It seems like most people go highest and best, but what's the conversation like with them?
Yeah, a lot of times we do. We'll set a deadline. If we list a home at 10 a.m., multiple offers by 2 p.m. Sometimes from a buyer's perspective, they'll put a deadline on that. Maybe they want a quick turnaround, a couple hour response time, the buyer does. But we can set that up when we have multiple offers, say, hey, we want everything best and final by 8 p.m. We're going to pick one offer. And usually that will get, it should usually get that person's best and final. But again, there's other things that weigh in, that closing date. If there's any, because the closing date can make a difference because you're holding that home longer. So that's longer taxes, that's longer interest, that's longer utilities. So you don't necessarily see that in a monetary value on that offer, but it's there.
It affects the sellers.
Yep, absolutely. So that's one thing to look at. Especially when it's day one, you can be a little more stern. You can either pick one of those offers, and when you ask for best and final, you don't even necessarily have to accept one of them. You can actually choose to work with one of those offers and counter it, and maybe squeeze out a little more value for your seller too. So just because sometimes you do ask for best and finals, there is still an opportunity there to counter if that buyer wants to go beyond what they've already given.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because sometimes buyers or sellers will feel like, well, that's the best and final. Like the seller has to accept one of those. They don't have to accept any of the offers. They could reject, if there's 3 offers, they could reject all 3, or they could pick the one that's maybe positioned best and say, we'll do that, but we want it to close on this date versus that date, or we'll do that, but we don't want the closing cost credit or the home warranty, or we want, $3,000 more on price. They can negotiate with one. At that point, they can pick one or they can reject, those. And on the seller side, an option, is to, if you have multiple offers, you can pick one to negotiate with them. But most people want that highest and best because they want to see all 3 parties come forward. Not the only, but the one downside I could definitely think of with doing highest and best is there can be scenarios where people will not want to compete. So they'll just say, well, we don't want to compete, we're out. So if you have an example, you have multiple offers from 2 people and you go back to both of them and say, we want highest and best. well, what if both people pull out and say, we don't want to compete?
Yeah, that's
and now you're down to zero.
That's a very real scenario. So it's good to have that conversation with the seller. Do you want to put that deadline and ask for those best and finals? Because once you open that door can be shut right in your face at the same point. So that's the same with countering. When you get those best and final offers, if you do counter one, you've opened the door for that person to maybe change their mind, get cold feet or whatever,
walk away,
and walk away. And then, like you said, then you're left with nobody. You can go back to that other person, but maybe they feel scorned now, and now Correct. They don't want your home. So, yeah, those are things you have to tread lightly on. But the important part is knowing all those options, going through them, and then at the end of the day, I make my recommendation, but the seller gets to decide how we proceed.
Yeah, and all of these different scenarios, there's pros and cons to each way you attack it. And that's where it's a conversation with the client, whether it's a buyer or seller, to talk about, here's the pros and cons. In this case, you're a seller, multiple offers, pros and cons. If we go highest and best, has usually the most positives, but it could be a negative where, if we go back, one or all the parties could decide to walk away. So it's always good to have that conversation, talk about scenarios, talk about what could happen, and then talk about the pros and cons and likelihood of all these things happening. But at the end of the day, all of these different options and negotiating on these, it's try to help the client get their best.
Yeah, let my experience help you with that and give you those options. Because if you haven't, if you buy or sell a home once every 20 years, you probably haven't been through this in a while. So let my 80 deals in 2018 be that experience and play those scenarios off for you. So then you can kind of decide what you like the best and what fits you the best.
Yeah, what fits best. So don't think we have any questions at this point. So we'll wrap up this show. So as always, if you have any questions, and you're watching this video not live, feel free to drop them in the comments or reach out to us or Matt Clark and ask us any questions. So before I kind of sign off, Matt, how can they reach out to you, connect with you, social media wise? Phone number, stuff like that.
Sure, directly. Phone number is 563-212-5959. You can reach my wife as well. We should probably mention her every once in a while. So you can reach out to Kelsey as well, 319-389-3350. My email is matt@IAHomes.com. Kelsey's is kelsey@IAHomes.com. You can also reach us on our Facebook page. We do a lot of correspondence on there. It all goes to the phone. So no matter how you reach out to us, we'll see it one way or another.
Yep, and the Facebook page is Clark Real Estate Team.
Yes, at IAHomes Realty.
Yep, with IAHomes Realty. As always, if you have other questions or topics that you'd like to discuss, you can reach out to Matt Clark with the Clark team or reach out to us here at IAHomes. And I hope you guys have a great rest of the week. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.